Hello, everybody. Welcome to Food Systems, Food Justice, and Foodways. I'm going to pass it over to Kisaya.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Food Systems, Food Justice, and Foodways. And thank you so much for joining us. Again, my name is Kisaya Bascom. I am the founder and owner of Offbeat Compost, a current board member of Mill City Grows, a former employee of Mill City Grows, and a longtime grower of food. It's very appropriate for Mill City Grows to be hosting this event now, as more people are making the connection between historic and current injustices within our society and their intersection with food, the environment, and climate change. Today, you will hear from folks who are advocating for food justice across the region and who have dared to redefine the word sustainability as more than the building of healthy soils and plants, but a word that encompasses the nurturing and the care and the centralizing of the humans within our communities. I'm now going to pass it on to Jamie, our moderator for the day, to continue this conversation for us.
Great, thanks so much, Kisaya, and thanks for coming to us. Hopefully you got that right in the beginning, but she's coming to us live from the Offbeat Compost truck, which I think puts the entire event into context, so it's great.
Thanks, Jamie.
So I'm Jamie Klufts. I'm a public health practitioner and a board member at Mill City Grows, and really honored to moderate this panel discussion today. Food access has been the through line of my entire career in public health, and so I'm really happy to be here. As we continue to grapple with this public health pandemic we are all confronting, we are also dealing with the impacts it's creating on our food system, access to food, and specifically hunger in our communities. In my mind, we cannot talk about public health, which is all about health equity, right? How we access resources in our own communities so that we can be healthy and well, without talking about food justice, which includes all of the things that the organizations that you'll hear from today work on. So I'm really excited to learn from our panelists, hear how each of their organizations have responded to their community's needs, and to also learn about the future of this work, where we're headed, and hopefully perhaps some opportunities that have presented themselves in the midst of this crisis. So we will let our panelists introduce themselves in just a moment. But first I want to thank the Mill City Grows team for putting on this event. Jessica, who you'll hear from throughout the event, Catherine, Carrie, Suzanne, everyone else, you are amazing. I'm so proud to be on the board of this organization and support the incredible work that you do every single day in the greater Lowell community. Now for a quick sort of housekeeping item. We may not be able to see all of you attendees, beautiful attendees' faces, but we can certainly see your engagement in the chat. So we hope that you will respond to things that panelists are saying, pose questions that you may have as they come up for you in the chat. There will be time for Q&A at the end of our panel discussion, and so we'll do our best to circle back to as many questions as we can at that time. And then any questions we cannot get to, the Mill City Grows team will follow up on their social media channels in the days following the event. So somebody from the Mill City Grows team will share the links to social media in the chat so you can follow Mill City Grows and get answers to what I'm sure are going to be really thoughtful questions. So let's test this chat box feature and get some of these engagement juices flowing. So if you are tuning in today, we would love to know where you are tuning in from. So if you could drop in the chat your current location so we can see the hopefully wide net this event has cast today. So are you in LA, Boston, Lowell, Hartford? Where are you? Want to see it? Brighton, Watertown, Worcester, Somerville, great. Massachusetts is well represented today.
I saw Reno, Nevada in there as well.
Oh my goodness. New Orleans, this is awesome. New Hampshire, my home state, my people. Awesome. Andover, love it. This is amazing. I see State Representative Vanna Howard representing beautiful downtown Lowell. Amazing. Thank you for being here. Cohasset, Lowell, awesome. Thank you all so much. Glad to know the chat box feature works. You're ready to be engaged and engage with our wonderful panelists who are now going to introduce themselves. So we're going to go in alphabetical order by first name. Would love for you to tell us who you are, what you do, and perhaps why you're excited to be with us today. So first, we'll start with Grace.
Hi, I'm Grace Sawaski, and I'm the Director of Programs for the Regional Environmental Council, better known as REC, in Western Massachusetts. Our mission is to bring people together to create a just food system and to build healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities in Worcester and beyond. We have a youth urban ag program, a community and school gardens network, and a community and mobile farmers market program. And I'm happy to be here because we are huge fans of Mill City Grows, sister organizations in many ways. In pre-COVID years, we love bringing our youth out for field trips to the farm. So I was honored to be asked, and I'm really happy to get to speak with the other panelists today.
Thanks so much, Grace. And clearly I need to go back to elementary school because I did not know my alphabet. Charlotte, do you mind going next? Thank you.
No worries. We're all there after so many Zoom calls. I get it. My name is Charlotte Border. I am the Director of Operations at Boston Area Gleaners. So we're a gleaning organization, which means harvesting crops that would otherwise go to waste and redirecting them to food pantries and food banks. So that's sort of our bread and butter. This year we did a lot of things relative to COVID relief and just trying to work out issues in the supply chain to get food from where it was trapped in the supply chain to where it was needed. A huge part of that was we were contractors for the USDA Farmers to Families food box program. So that took up a lot of our time this year. And just as a metric for scale of change, in 2019, we moved about 1 million pounds of food, and in 2020, we're at about 8 million pounds. So that's sort of what we saw this year and what we're up to. And I'm excited to be here as well. Always love talking with other organizations about this stuff.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks for being here. Jessica, turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Wilson. I am the Executive Director of Mill City Grows in Lowell, Massachusetts. I've been part of this team ever since Mill City Grows was born as a volunteer, a member of the board, and now really happy to be a member of the staff. As all of you hopefully know, we do food access and education here in Lowell, and that includes community and school gardens, urban farming, mobile markets, and food education. And one of the reasons I'm so excited that we are able to do this today is I look to all of the folks on this call and their organizations for inspiration and the work that we do, and just kind of knowing that we're all in this together. And I think one of the things that has gotten me through the past year is just imagining a better future. And I'm really excited to hear people's learnings and visions.
Thanks, Jessica. Next, John, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is John Wong, pronouns he, him, his. So currently I'm holding 2 positions at the Food Project. So I'm the North Shore Regional Director and have recently transitioned into a Deputy Director role for both of our regions. So the Food Project in general, just really quickly, is like kind of doing work at the intersection of 3 areas. There's youth engagement and partnership. There's the food systems, food justice work that we do, and then a lot of community engagement, relationship building, like on the ground as well. And all kind of like around this framework of doing some dialogue and work across difference very intentionally. So we hire high school age youth to help do a lot of this work together. And some of the things that I'm really excited about, I'm just, just excited to be in conversation and relationship with folks here, like even before this and currently, and to learn from a lot of the collective wisdom in the group and just moving that forward ongoing, I think reflecting on what other folks have shared already. And I talked a little bit about the Food Project, but I'll let Naomi, who I'm here with as well, share a little bit about herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Naomi Agosto. I use she, her, hers. I'm currently a Bloom Crew Fellowship Program member, and I'm actually an alumni of all the youth crews at the Food Project. I've been working at the Food Project since 2017, so since I was a freshman in high school, and now I'm 19 and still continuing my TFP journey as a college student.
Awesome, thank you so much, John and Naomi. Next, Kelly.
First, thank you so much to Mill City Grows for hosting this great event. My name is Kelly Prue. I'm the Development and Communications Coordinator for the Merrimack Valley Food Bank. We're one of 4 food banks in Massachusetts. One of our primary roles is to collect, safely store, and distribute food through a network of over 100 member agencies. Last year, we distributed 3.96 million pounds of food, and we're on pace to exceed that number this year. We also operate some direct service programs, including a mobile pantry that delivers groceries to homebound seniors and disabled individuals. And our Operation Nourish program provides food to students in the public schools. We also operate a community market, which is a free farmers market at the Lowell Housing Authority properties. And I'm excited to be part of the panel and learn from all of my fellow panelists. I've learned a lot already just in the preparation leading up to this event, so I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here, Kelly. Next, we have Latha. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. So I'm Latha Swami. I'm the Director of Food System Policy for the City of New Haven. So that's quite a unique role. I'm the only city official in Connecticut that's focused on food and agricultural policy. And actually, there are only about 20 other food policy directors in municipal government in the US. And I believe I see my colleague from Boston on the call. So hello. You know, the way that my division works is we all must recognize and understand that slavery, genocide, and colonization have enabled and ensured the growth and development of the food and ag systems in the US. So food systems transformation is inseparable from rectifying these harms. So we must work toward dismantling racism and other structural injustices. So the division that I lead, we strive to embody these values because we believe it's imperative that we don't hold profit more valuable than people or planet. So our mission is to support and help manifest community-led efforts that envision and create an environmentally sustainable and socially just food system. We operate through a food justice framework using a coalition building approach across 3 thematic priorities: health equity, socioeconomic justice, and environmental justice. And these themes kind of hone in on our core of developing and supporting anti-racist food farming and land use policies. And one other point to emphasize is we strongly focus on addressing root causes and striving for systemic change. For example, tackling upstream solutions as economic security and secure land access versus solely focusing on downstream interventions such as emergency food. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Last but not least, we have Cheryl. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Cheryl Durant, the Food and Nutrition Coordinator for New Roots Community Farm. The farm is a part of the International Rescue Committee, which is a refugee resettlement organization, and the New Roots program is national in about 20 cities in the US. I'm an urban farmer, and we use urban agriculture as a tool for integration for our arriving refugees, asylees, and immigrants. We partner with community members to run our New Roots Community Farm, where we do a lot of food security work. We also use the farm for other educational activities as English as a second language, financial literacy, enterprise, and so forth. We run a farmer's market during the season, as well as we do emergency food work for our community. I'm very happy to be here today because I'm all about solidarity. I'm all about building bridges and intersectionality, learning from folks so that we can build a stronger network to tackle the injustices in our food system.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. I think our audience is in for a treat. You all represent such important and intersectional parts of this work, so thank you. Our first question is for all of the panelists. Question is, in thinking about the coordinated and systems level response the pandemic has required of all of us, what sorts of collaboration, advocacy, or legislative change did you utilize, implement, or pursue in order to address issues around access to resources or health equity in your community? So what sort of systems change did you pursue to help sort of meet the needs that you were seeing? And hopefully I can call on Grace first to tackle that question.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll keep it brief just so we can dive in deeper for the other questions. But there were 3 kind of coalition examples that came to mind for this question. that are both local and state. So locally in Worcester, as many communities did, a new body convened in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In our case, brought together by some of the philanthropic leaders in Worcester, called Worcester Together. And it coalesced around generating a fund to do immediate COVID response work, but also a number of working groups, including an emergency food working group that met weekly and continues to still meet. And that provided a space for organizations like the REC and folks like myself who hadn't previously seen ourselves as really tightly interconnected with emergency food providers, although, aware of and worked with them kind of more generally. Having weekly meetings together really allowed space to build connections and relationships with the folks doing that work near us, with the faith-based community. And we had a lot of conversations around the cultural relevance of food offerings, emergency food offerings, and drive-through pantries being created, and also about accessibility. So not just physical accessibility, but safety, thinking about practicality of folks accessing resource. One example was the Worcester Public School meals. The pickup times and locations overlapped with online learning. And so we were having conversations about how can parents access the meals for their children if you're a single parent with multiple children, supervising them to learn at home, and really kind of doing some creative problem solving in that space. The second group is the Mass Urban Ag Coalition, which was a great opportunity to connect across the state with other organizations doing similar work, and particularly useful for us for conversations around the Healthy Incentives program. So I was in a lot of conversations with Allie from Mill City Grows, with John here from the Food Project, about what do we need to do practically to adapt our markets to be safe, and also to continue, again, with that accessibility piece, having markets feel safe and feel welcoming and comply with updated regulations. And then the final group is our local Food Policy Council, who've been doing some really interesting work around legislative policy for SNAP, particularly access to DTA offices during the pandemic, and some challenges specific to Worcester that existed beforehand, and looking about increasing eligibility for prepared meals for SNAP recipients, which really was highlighted as a challenge folks were experiencing, particularly those who were in quarantine.
Thanks, Grace. Hoping we can next hear from the Food Project. John and Naomi, what sorts of collaboration or advocacy systems change work have you been doing?
So for me in Bloom Crew in the greater Boston region, in the fall, we primarily did raised garden beds, and we built those beds for people around the neighborhood, but we had to put a stop for that in the winter. So what we started to do in the winter is we started collaborating with Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, and we started volunteering at their distribution site because we as Bloom Crew wanted to see how we can develop the Dudley Food Hub and how we can expand access. So, we would volunteer at their distribution site every Friday, and we got to see how they would run things, where they would get their donations from, what organizations they were partnered with, and what services they were able to provide for, the immediate relief that people needed in the neighborhood. And eventually we wanted to start our own distribution site outside of our office in the Dudley neighborhood. And although immediate emergency relief situations like that is not the permanent solution, Bloom Crew really wanted to see where we can gain more skills in terms of how we can expand food access. So we got to learn how to place orders at local farms and purchase their produce. And we would also sort the food at our greenhouse to make sure that the bag shares were getting good quality food that we would pass out. And we would bag about 200 bags every week, and to make sure that enough people in the neighborhood were having access to our food distribution site, because we wanted to have another day where people can rely on getting free food during the winter. So we did this whole process starting January of this year, and we recently ended our distribution site at the end of March. Besides our work in Bloom Crew, other TFP staff have also worked with the City of Boston's Office of Food Access to support residents and local farmers in the city.
Thanks, Naomi. So I'm representing a little bit of the work in the North Shore. And so the onset of COVID, there was a Lynn Food Security Task Force that was formed, which actually really complemented like this Lynn Grows resident-led initiative to build a better food system in the city of Lynn. So you had this food security task force that had a lot of institutional partners and a lot of support from the city side, and this other Lynn Grows steering committee that had a lot of residents that have been involved for over 3 years now, that have been guiding kind of the food project and leveraging resources to build a better food system in that area. So because of that relationship and working and intersecting with each other, we were able to get like real on the ground information to really act upon in terms of supporting folks in that exact moment or so. So it helped us like develop some of the COVID protocols to keep markets up and running when there wasn't yet guidance from the MDAR and mass.gov to help us keep going. So working closely with the public health department, working with residents of like where that needs to go, if that is something that is a want or so. So getting more clarity and like streamlining that conversation with each other and building that trust with each other. And then with that too, like, you know, working with a municipality, the city of Lynn, to fund produce distribution from the food project to those in need. And we partnered with, you know, also our staff members to be able to ensure that our market, which was then determined to be an essential food access part, to continue moving and operating through this time. And then so it's very interesting as we're, you know, one of the topics that we've held like really closely is like, yes, emergency food is important. And for us to, you know, build a better food system, like a different food system that can mitigate like some of these issues in the future, there's got to be space to, you know, dream and reimagine kind of like what that looks like. And how do you care for that emergency food distribution at that time and make space for things that take time to grow, like to steward like these seeds that often take, you know, several years or so in that area. So really paying attention to that and really engaging in the conversation with funders and other folks and partners and residents around that to see what can happen. And there's been some really beautiful stuff that has come around. There's like cross-sector collaborations between local artists and local businesses and pilots of like certain kinds of things that could bring us to a more just, I think, food system as we're looking at it as a whole. So.
Thank you both. Jessica, I have a feeling that John said reimagine. I know that that is a phrase you love to use in thinking about this work. So what ways in which, so maybe you want to build on what John said a little bit, but also what other sorts of collaboration or advocacy work is Mill City Grows doing or did do?
Absolutely. I think, you know, hearing from Grace and Naomi and John, and just thinking about how I think we each approach this in a like as collaborative a way as we could in our own communities while all staying in touch with each other. I had just come into this position, so I had not really done a lot of networking through all of the like regional growers when I kind of had stepped in. And I think one of the things that was really wonderful was the online community that came up around, you know, what are people doing? How are you handling, you know, HIP transactions that need to be done in person? And what are your workarounds for this? And so having that really supportive community of folks that are in the food justice world who are doing similar types of work was really fantastic. I think the other thing that happened for us very quickly is most of our outreach in Lowell is done in in-person context. We have a very multilingual community, and so it's a lot easier to meet people out and about, to be able to distribute materials or give them information about something that's happening. When that piece was taken away, the ability to kind of talk to folks who maybe have a gap in technology access, or are, you know, we didn't necessarily have the translation tech to be able to communicate with people that we would normally be seeing on a regular basis. We really had to reach out to our local partners. And so, you know, all of the collaborators that we had done different programming with were just on the phone, you know, making calls to people. There are some local coalitions here, so the Greater Lowell Health Alliance, the Hunger and Homelessness Commission, talking to them about who needs food, how do we reach them. And we started doing, you know, programming that we had never done before, but realizing that these are things that the community could benefit from, and we will, you know, figure out ways to continue doing into the future. So we created an online store, and we were able to do CSAs with delivery. But we were doing all of that in collaboration with folks here in Lowell. And a very new collaboration that we started working with a Reach Lowell, which is overseen by the Lowell Community Health Center and funded in part by a grant from the CDC. And the idea with that coalition is to really create engagement in the Southeast Asian and Latinx communities, specifically for folks who have a diabetes diagnosis. Diabetes rates are very high here in Lowell, and that's in part, very much due to lack of equity in health access and access to food and other resources. And so this coalition doesn't just focus on food, it focuses on housing, support for asthma, smoking cessation, general health education, healthcare. There was a campaign that we did about flu vaccinations and informing people about where they could get them and what they should know before they go. And being able to work with that, really newly formed coalition was incredible because we were all communicating with each other to make sure that we were staying on task with our goal, which was to create more health equity across the community in a variety of ways.
Thanks, Jessica. Kelly, I'd love to hear from you now, also kind of bridging the gap, right, coming from Lowell, but expanding out to the Merrimack Valley as a whole. What is the food bank? What sorts of collaboration has the food bank been doing?
So obviously collaboration is a huge piece of everything that we do. It feeds into all of our programming in every step of the way. So we're also part of the Reach Lowell coalition that Jessica just mentioned. We've also been meeting throughout the pandemic with groups of emergency food providers in both Lowell and Lawrence weekly to identify and address issues and gaps as they come up kind of in real time. But just in kind of an overarching sense, all of our work at the food bank is built around the idea that providing nutritious food to individuals and families who are struggling with food insecurity is a means to advancing equity. Providing that access to healthy food is removing one of the barriers that can prevent people from achieving success in their chosen pursuits. So one of the ways we want to make access to healthy food more equitable is by providing that access to people in the places that they already are. So we know that one of the barriers for a lot of people in accessing healthy food is transportation, or having the time to get somewhere to access that healthy food, or the comfort and familiarity with traveling to a different part of their city, maybe to access food. So what we want to do is eliminate that barrier for as many people as we can. So we partner with as many agencies as we can to be points of distribution for the food that we are collecting, storing, and distributing. So we work with over 100 nonprofits that are located in different neighborhoods and cities throughout the region in 30 different communities to try to make it easier for people to access food. And then all of our direct service programs work kind of that same way as well, providing food to students at their schools, to residents of Lowell Housing Authority properties right outside their front door, to homebound individuals in their residences. And then in the summer, we provide food to students at the sites where they're participating in activities. So the overall idea is getting food to people in places where they're going to be anyway, to kind of eliminate that barrier. And we collaborate with over 100 organizations to make that possible.
It's amazing to hear all of you talk about the social determinants in your approach to work too, right? How you're collaborating to make sure that needs not beyond food are being addressed as you're doing your work, with food being your primary focus. It's really amazing. Makes my public health heart sing. So it's wonderful to hear. Next, we'd love to hear from Charlotte. What sort of collaboration and advocacy work have you been up to?
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said here. We need like a lot longer time than we have today, but it's exciting to hear from everybody and have so many overlapping themes here. I think something that was really encouraging for us to see this year was just all of a sudden this resurgence in interest in collaborating, like we all got tossed into this together overnight. And so there were all of these smaller groups forming to address things at their local level and beyond that. So that's been really fun for us to be a part of. I think we sort of had a head start there because we're a more systems-based organization. So we're looking at the broader food system. So we already had a lot of those connections, but we really got to build upon them. And that I think has made everything a lot more successful. In the early stages of COVID, we were seeing a lot of supply chain issues where there was food, it just wasn't in the right place. So we spent a lot of our early days just working on logistics and trying to figure out where the food was and how we could facilitate getting it where it needed to be. So we have a fleet of trucks and we were able to do that. As we moved forward a little bit, we spent a lot of time consulting with partner organizations, trying to help them learn to scale. So a lot of these food pantries, you know, maybe we're seeing 60 to 100 families a week, and all of a sudden they were seeing 400 families a week, or certain pantries that we're seeing are serving 600 or 800 families a day, multiple days. So we spent a lot of time helping people figure out their own fleet, their own systems, and how they were going to, you know, make that work for them in a sustainable way. So that was a really fun thing to be a part of. After that, some of these relief programs came online. So like I said, we were a contractor of the USDA Farmers to Families Food Box program, which was launched last spring. We actually put in an application to be a vendor for that because we were hoping to secure some sales for our local farmers because we wanted to support them as well. And so much was uncertain at that time that we thought that would be a good move. We weren't sure how food pantries were going to be operating, so we thought it made sense for us to jump into that space. It was a wild ride and continues to be a wild ride. So we were a contractor for the first 2 rounds, which were produce boxes only. And basically every round, the USDA has drastically overhauled the box contents, the requirements for the program, who's getting the contract. And so basically we've spent a lot of this year just trying to sort of level out all of those changes, right? So every time a new contract is awarded, it's awarded to usually a distributor who has the right infrastructure to produce these boxes, but they have no connection to the hunger relief industry. And a lot of them are even outside of the region that they're expected to be serving. So we've had to do a lot of advocacy work there, just trying to give some feedback to the USDA, and that structure is really not helpful for the goals that we're trying to reach here. And then also just trying to help those vendors get off the ground and help them make the connections that they need to make to be successful in their contract. So that program has worked as intended. You know, all the boxes have gone out in our area. That's not the case in all the different areas of the US, but for us, they've all gone out. And that's, you know, like about 50,000 a week in Massachusetts. So that's no small feat to get that done. So that's a piece of it. And now we're trying to get a little bit farther away from this reactive place and get some better systems in place to move forward from here. So for us, that means really focusing on our gleaning work and supporting our local farms by growing our food hub, which aggregates produce and finds new sales outlets for our farmers. We're also working on growing our apprenticeship program, which brings in folks who are interested but don't have this background and trains them up and sets them free. So we had a crew of 8 this year on our apprenticeship program. They came in, they learned a bunch from us. They got to see all of this COVID stuff, and now they've gone off to nonprofits across the country to continue this work forward. So we're inching away from reactivity to a place of a little bit more stability, but we've got a long road ahead of us. So it's interesting to see what everybody else is working on in this realm.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. Charlotte, I would love to turn over to you now. What sorts of collaboration or advocacy work did you engage in or utilize to address the issues in your community?
I feel like this question is kind of like a double-edged sword for me because COVID kind of interrupted a lot of the work that we traditionally do, and we had to rethink and pivot in ways that we were not accustomed to. As an urban farmer working on a site in green space, we, as I said before, we use our site for integration for asylees, refugees, and community members. But also, given that we live in a dense city, New York City, where access to land is very, very minimal, and working in a community that is largely marginalized, green space is very important to people. So therefore, having COVID come and people not having access to green space and scrambling to figure out how to open up your site and to put in place protocols so that you can get back to where you were was pretty difficult. And second, the work that we did was around lifting up the folks in our community through leadership, through collaborations, through enterprise. And then COVID hit, and we're faced with the stark reality that our food system is completely broken, and that food insecurity is exacerbated, because what we thought food insecurity was before, food insecurity was like quadrupled, triple, quadrupled. So the work that we were doing in education, in community engagement, in growing food for community, having our farmers market, developing enterprise for our community members, all of that got pivoted to emergency food work. So in order to serve an immediate need, which was necessary, but then it put a pause on us developing models, food models in our community that would help to lift people up out of poverty. So we spent all this year retooling and working in emergency food, which was good for us because we got to see the gaps. We got to see where necessary work was needed and where we had fallen down. So some of the things that we did, some of the ways in which we collaborated was, as community gardens in the South Bronx, we formed a microfood hub where we aggregated what we grew in these community gardens and was able to give out free shares to food insecure populations, communities. Another way we were able to access funds through the New York State Nourish New York program and partner with a larger distributor, a larger organization that was able to, that had the capacity to funnel these funds to organizations, to groups like ours, so that we could drill down into our communities, have access to surplus food by farmers who couldn't get their food out through the supply chain. We were able to purchase that food, bag these foods, and give out to our community members. And like Charlotte said, we would see where we would serve 40 people, we were seeing hundreds of people that we were serving in a week. So those were the two main programs that we focused on. And we were able to continue our farmers market, but what we did more than just growing and selling the food that was from our farm was to make that concerted effort to connect to regional farmers so that we could support those farmers that were, support at least some farmers that were affected by COVID. So we not only sold our own food at our market, we were able to host other farmers at our farm stand so we could aggregate their food and serve more diverse foods. I think those are the main ways in which we were able to collaborate and actually work during the time of COVID. What I would like to see happen, as Charlotte said, is to begin to really tackle the issues of food insecurity and really build food models in our communities that help to, to bring further equity to our communities and further have a more just food system.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate how explicit you were about the challenges, right? Everybody's talked about the resilience that their organizations have been able to enact to kind of get through, but I appreciate you naming how challenging this has been. Mm-hmm. Lastly, we'll hear from Latha. What sorts of collaboration, advocacy, or legislative change did you utilize?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'd love to expand on what I heard John and Cheryl and some of the other panelists mention, highlighting the piece around what comes after times of emergency, or rather, what comes before times of emergency, which is supporting thriving, sustainable food systems. So, ultimately our collective long-term goal should be to really ensure that we don't need food banks and food pantries. We shouldn't need them to exist because the need for emergency food has been eliminated. This means everyone has adequate food because the right to food is a human right. And the right to food is not about charity, but it's about ensuring that people have the capacity to produce, procure, prepare, share, eat food that's nutritionally and culturally appropriate, and also free from exploitation of themselves and any other people or animals. So given this, I'd love to share an example of some of the work we're pursuing in New Haven around community ownership of the production of food. And it kind of takes advantage of a legislative change that happened recently. So the USDA formed a new Office of Urban Ag and Innovative Production that was in the 2018 Farm Bill. And the call for a couple of grants came out from this new office during the peak of, our reactive COVID emergency response that we were all seeped in. So thankfully, I was able to, it was very hard and many sleepless nights of dedicating some time to write this grant. And in the grant, we actually highlighted the root causes of the devastating impacts of the pandemic on hunger and the food supply chain, as some other panelists mentioned. And we did this in order to emphasize our desire to shift more land and resources into the hands of New Haven residents so that they have ownership and the means to produce their own food right here in the city, and to create an enabling environment for urban ag growth and development so that they have, so that we build resilience for future shocks, that we support food sovereignty, community ownership, equity, and protection against gentrification and displacement. So actually, we did receive the grant. It was $500,000. We're developing the first New Haven Urban Ag Master Plan. And maybe one piece that I'll highlight, because there are many components to this, we're actually co-leading this with a group, a community advisory board that we are actually have applications out for right now, which are actually available in 8 languages. And we want to collect a group of residents, up to 60 residents, that we are paying $25 an hour to actually share their knowledge and expertise around barriers and challenges in New Haven around, why are they not participating in urban ag? Or if they do, what are they, finding as barriers? They're opaque city processes, everything's cumbersome. Being a city official and being in this unique role, I can advocate for them within the city government. I can actually work on land use policies and zoning and these kind of, ordinance level things that may be harder for other coalitions and groups to advocate for, or even have the knowledge around how to navigate those processes. So essentially we were able to secure this $500,000 now, but the framing that we used in our grant, I don't think that would have been possible like 2 years ago. I think this increased heightened awareness around food systems and really highlighting that root cause is how we were able to secure this funding right now.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Love it. The systems change work is inspiring. I need to come out there and see what you all are up to, because it definitely is amazing. We need to bring that to Massachusetts. So our next question is just for a handful of our panelists, but it reads, as we know, this pandemic has exacerbated food insecurity. So how have you used incentive programs or other innovative approaches to fill the food access gaps, perhaps in lieu of or in complement to even government sanction programs? And an example of that would be in Massachusetts, the HIP program, the Healthy Incentives Program. So I think, Grace and John, I think you might have a similar approach to this question or a similar answer. So open it up to either of you or both of you to respond and build off each other.
Yeah, I can kick it off. And our response was really developed in conversation with John and with Allie and with a lot of other folks doing similar works across the state. So I really resonated with what Cheryl spoke about just the disruption that the pandemic created in terms of the larger work, especially for folks who see their role as really thinking about work in the food system and building those food models. And I think that there was an interesting period for the REC of kind of clarification of where we could be the most helpful that would still feel true to our mission and the spirit of our programs. And so with the onset of the pandemic, we kind of had 2 immediate focuses, foci. One of them was directly supporting the members of our youth grow program. So just immediately starting to do home delivery of food and getting in contact with them and making sure that their sort of primary needs were being met. And then secondly, thinking about how could we continue to offer access for the Healthy Incentives Program. So just prior to the onset of the pandemic, we had been running indoor mobile market locations at community health centers and the senior center. They were incredibly busy and well used, and also terrible locations for COVID safety. The health center, obviously we could not continue to operate markets there. The senior center closed. And at that point, we were the only hip vendor in Worcester operating in February. We have a lot of seasonal hip vendors. We don't have a lot in the early spring. And so we looked to other organizations and other communities for models, trying to think of something that we could launch quickly and safely. And we came up with a program we called Hip to Go, which was inspired from another farm in one of the surrounding towns in Massachusetts, where folks could order online a few different preset bags of produce that was HIP eligible. We did the sourcing through our local food hub, and it was really basic, just using Google Forms with a pickup in a parking lot. And we got that up and running, and sort of once it was operational, started to think about how can we address these barriers for people to be able to use this. You need to use an online form. It's a single location. It's kind of the antithesis of what the mobile market's about. And we were able to develop this really great organic connection with Southeast Asian Coalition, which is a community-based organization in Worcester that was doing really tremendous work leveraging PPE and working with their youth program members as volunteers. And so they ended up getting trained as liaisons to help elders in the Southeast Asian community to be able to pick up their orders for Hip to Go. And that was really effective in the spring. So then we took some time in the summer. We were able to reopen the open air markets outdoors with different COVID restrictions, but still more similar to kind of how we traditionally do. And we're thinking sort of as the fall came, okay, what are we going to do now? We have more time to plan. What are we going to do? And so we made the decision to extend our markets through December outdoors and just bundle up. And thank goodness we had a pretty mild December to give us some more time to plan. And then we relaunched Hip to Go, but with a comprehensive online store. We also worked to have the instructions for how to order be translated in 5 different languages, and build some partnerships with other cultural organizations to help with training folks on how to place an order, and also offering to make orders for different customers. And the first week the store opened, we didn't really know how folks would respond to it. It was a big shift. And we ended up getting orders for $7,000 worth of produce in the first week of the program, which is around 5,000 pounds of food. So we've continued that model through the spring, and are looking now as we shift back into the open air market season about how we might continue this option for pre-orders, which for some people might be more effective, but also bringing back the open air markets and shopping. I will say our ability to do these kinds of pivots was 100% because we were supported with emergency grants. It's much more expensive. It's not something that would be feasible for farmers to be able to do on their own. And so it's really important for us to be intentional about our sourcing and to not put ourselves in competition with farmers whenever possible. But I think longer term, one of the challenges coming out of this is going to think about how do we sustain some of these efforts that are more accessible for folks without the infusion of those emergency funds, and what does that look like?
Awesome. Thanks, Grace. And just to add, like, I think we resonate with a lot of the work that Grace has been doing, and I think a lot of other folks have been doing around this. Just like some context from our side, Greater Boston and Lynn, just like we've been developing deeper partnerships, relationships with residents, and the ways that we formally engage in our Lynn and Dudley Grows initiatives, and kind of like the mutual aid networks that we're forming all over the place. And kind of like what Naomi was referring to before is just like our Build a Garden program just ramped up, just removing obstacles for folks to be able to grow their own food during this time too. So built a lot of, raised beds to facilitate that, and offered like a lot of free compost, free seeds, help facilitate like seed libraries for folks to just do exchanges at the public library, launching like a tool library or so for shared opportunities there. And we've been engaged with a lot of conversations of land opportunity or so, and we're not necessarily the right organization to do that. So we're kind of in the process of like, learning from some folks in the greater Boston area, like how to better facilitate some of those opportunities that are coming up to transition some land back to a lot of the residents or so that are in these communities being most impacted by this. So and one of the big things too is just like, intersectional movement work, like what is our role in that? At times in this work, I felt like, just wholly focused on just food systems, and like, how can I engage with like the workers' rights and fair wages and affordable housing that are also major contributing factors in, the legacy of like stolen land and, forced labor in our food system. And how are we interweaving like all of those components as we move forward with this work together? And so we're much more engaged in that. And I think there was a lot of opportunity to do that intersectional work together. And so I'm just really interested in like getting out of those places to be in more dialogue with each other around that. And then, those are some ways that in lieu of kind of like some of the benefits. And then with like healthy incentives program, like the Lynn Central Square Market in Lynn is one of the largest kind of federal and state benefits transaction sites in the state. So, on a good day, we'll have like 1,500 to almost 2,000 folks just, come by. And so we were really scared about like, this was a major food access site and how are we going to do this with COVID? And I mentioned before, it was such a great partnership between residents, municipal stakeholders to be able to really move forward really quickly in a place where food security was like growing, to be able to move forward to make sure that that kept on going. And not only for residents, but supporting like 3 small farm vendors like in the area from the Massachusetts area to continue earning income from this particular place that was very important to them. We also were able to do a lot of mobile market sites to a lot of the senior housing sites and piloting different areas that we were hearing from like our steering committee members of like, you should go pilot a market here and let me connect you to here. So we were able to facilitate and move that. And we're doing a second round kind of iteration building off of that experience from last season to this new kind of like model that we're doing as COVID continues to evolve. And then one of the biggest things that we heard a lot is just from a lot of folks as we're building a different kind of food system in terms of HIP, just really leveraging the resources that we have to pilot like a massive like marketing outreach strategy for the Healthy Incentives Program, because what we found out was that a lot of folks still didn't know it, even in Lynn, about what the Healthy Incentives Program was. And so working with our youth and working with residents, like designed a flyer that was easily translatable visually versus just like a lot of heavy text or so. And, work in collaboration with some local artists and youth artists to design kind of a flyer that we're interested in like really piloting for this year as the market season starts to ramp up in Lynn specifically, and kind of like in greater Boston as well. So those are some of the things that we're, excited to continue moving forward with and being in conversation with folks here and elsewhere as well.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And thank you, Grace. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to Latha to give us kind of the non-Massachusetts perspective or answer to this question. How have you been using incentive programs or other innovative approaches to fill the gaps? We heard a little bit, but tell us more.
Yeah, so we don't have any incentive programs like HIP in New Haven, but I guess one thing that really, from the experiences in 2020, forever and always, I will advocate for root cause and systems change. And that is really a both and approach. So thinking about the long-term, transformational changes, while we are also addressing these immediate downstream social safety net programs. And, as a city official, as I mentioned already, I really care about removing barriers, as many barriers as possible, whether they're information barriers, regulatory barriers, or even resource barriers, so that the environment that we create is an enabling one. So if we did want to create an incentive program in New Haven, which we have actually started talking about on the state level in Connecticut, kind of trying to model the HIP program. It didn't go anywhere this time, but we still have our eye on it. But really, I think, the idea around community ownership, not just community feedback, protection against gentrification and displacement, secure land tenure, especially for BIPOC individuals. These have been mentioned, like language justice, making sure information is available in many languages, and really alleviating disparities in community representation and leadership and decision making, because I think it's still, in a lot of these spaces, it's still very white dominant. And that's something that we're actively working to change, so that it reflects more the communities that are most impacted by things like exacerbated food insecurity during a pandemic. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. And I know, Charlotte and Jessica, I know you were ready and willing to answer this question too, but I also have a feeling that you're going to tell us a little bit about your innovative approaches by answering the third question, if that's okay, if we move to our next question. So our third question is for all of you. You've each spoken to the challenges that you've experienced during the pandemic and what sorts of challenges the pandemic has created for you. So what opportunities have presented themselves through this crisis, and how do you think it will change your work going forward, perhaps for the better? So I think maybe I can go a little out of order because we skipped Jessica and Charlotte last time, but Jessica, can we start with you this time?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think this is really, it gets at the heart of what all the panelists have shared of, we knew a lot of things going into the pandemic and goals that we had. Things got interrupted. We learned new lessons, and, we're now at this space where I think while we're still facing a lot of challenges, there's a lot of opportunity in crisis to really be, and I think in this moment to say, like, these are the things that are plainly problematic that we really need to address. And so for us, I think, we did lots of work similar to Grace and John with, using HIP in figuring out how to use it in as many ways to get food to folks who needed it, in ways that were safe, and creating our CSA. Another, we've worked really closely with the Food as Medicine Coalition in Mass, and thinking about, how folks can use their Mass health benefits to access food and housing, because, these are really important factors in people's health. It's not just about access to healthcare, which is also really important, but, your long-term health outcomes are not going to be as high as positive if you don't have access to fresh food and you don't have access to a safe place to live. And so working, in coalition with people across the state to continue to advocate for this, and really piloting these programs across the state so that folks who are using Mass health benefits can also access food through organizations like ours, has been a really, something really important that we're just starting to do now. And we know there's lots of other organizations who have been doing this through 2020, but we want this program to really continue. We've also, worked with organizations like Mass Renews, and somebody shared a couple of documents in the chat earlier. This is an advocacy coalition across the state. It combines, green jobs, food justice, environmental justice, and youth empowerment into, one platform that is going to address a range of needs and involves people and engages people from all sectors across. And so some of the things we're looking at there are, creating green jobs that are also growing more food for folks in urban areas and throughout the state, so that local food becomes more available. So it's really upholding our local economy, and it's also really serving, to ensure that our food justice work continues. And I think locally, we've been, working with more small growers in our Market Gardener program, recruiting volunteers and other advocates. One of our goals is to build a food policy council here in Lowell, and we're starting to do some work through a community food assessment this year, really recruiting collaborators, talking about this idea of food justice and equity, and how, racial justice and food sovereignty all kind of converge here, and figuring out what are folks looking for in this community, and what were, the gaps that existed in our food system before the pandemic, and what has changed since then. And I think that, when we can involve our community in crafting policy recommendations, then we're getting to the point of real systems change, when every voice can be involved in that work.
Definitely. Thanks, Jessica. I think I'll jump to Cheryl next. Could you tell us a little bit about what sorts of opportunities have presented themselves, and what opportunities you may carry forward beyond the pandemic?
I think I was muted, sorry. I think what I have seen happen is out of the pandemic is that all of a sudden there is more collaboration across sectors. And we begin to look at our city or community that we live in a much more holistic way. And there's more talk about working together as opposed to living and working in silos. For example, it's traditional in New York City to pit community garden space or community farming space against affordable housing. It's a big issue. And what we're seeing happening is that slowly is that community gardeners or folks who occupy green space have begun to talk to folks who do advocacy around affordable housing and start to think about things like community land trusts and start to think about ways in which our urban landscape can look differently, where when we think about building or re-energizing communities, green space and affordable housing go hand in hand. That's one thing. One of the interesting things that I've done last year is gotten involved with an organization in New York called CENIC, the Cooperative Economic Alliance of New York City, that's big on solidarity economies. So they're very instrumental in having these cross-sectoral folks or spaces talk to each other and are actively, I wouldn't say campaigning, but actively doing work to bring these collaborations together, like going into these, having focus groups, talks, webinars, so that we can actually just talk to each other, know about each other's work, and see where we intersect. So I think for me, that's where I want to continue this particular type of work. I want to see more of that intersectionality. Because I think that's the only way that we can move forward. And also, if we collaborate in this way, we make ourselves a force, like a lobby, where we can actually effect change and effect real policy change. Because this is the first mayoral race that I have seen where all of a sudden food equity is a sexy topic and everybody's scrambling and falling over each other to see who can speak most eloquently about it. They have the language down, but I want to see real change emerge from just speaking about it.
Yes, that you're speaking my love language, policy change. That's what we need to see, and having the community, right? As Jessica pointed out, community and folks who are directly impacted, have lived experience with the issues, have a say in that change. Next, I'd like to move to Kelly. Kelly, what sorts of opportunities have presented themselves, and what sort of change may you carry forward in your work at the food bank?
So specifically for the food bank, we've been able to make some quick changes that really streamlined our distribution of food to our member agencies. So just the logistics around that are moving very smoothly now. And we've also been able to strengthen a lot of our partnerships with our member agencies and with other partners in the community. So I think both of those are going to really help strengthen our work moving forward. And in kind of a broader sense, for everyone who's working in this space, I think the opportunity right now is that over the course of the pandemic, there's been such a huge increase in awareness and concern from the community at large regarding the issue of food insecurity. I think for a lot of people, it really highlighted how food insecurity can impact anyone. That I think there are people who had a preconceived notion about who was accessing food pantries or meals programs, and now they're realizing that, you know, a lot of people are one missed paycheck or extra medical bill away from not knowing where their next meal is coming from. I know according to Feeding America early in the pandemic, about 40% of the people who were accessing food from food banks had never needed to ask for that kind of help before. So whether people saw those long lines for emergency food on the news, or maybe they had a friend or family member, or they themselves needed that kind of help for the first time, all of a sudden what had been kind of a theoretical issue that maybe they thought about once a year when their company was doing their Thanksgiving food drive was something that was very real and tangible, and right in front of them. And so I know the response to that has been incredible. I know a lot of other organizations have seen this as well, but for us at the food bank, our fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020. And during that fiscal year, more than 60% of the people who made financial donations to us were doing that for the very first time. So there are a whole lot of people now who are interested in this issue, who are aware of the issue of food insecurity, and hopefully those people are going to be receptive to all of the advocacy efforts that my fellow panelists have been talking about moving forward. and will want to be involved in these types of systems change and addressing the root causes of food insecurity moving forward.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And I would, for our attendees, I would encourage you to drop questions in the chat. When we're through with this question, we're going to turn it over to you, and we're going to ask the panelists what questions you have. So continue to think through what your questions are to our panelists, so we can make sure we can get to all of them. Next, I'd like to hear from Grace. What is your response to this question?
Well, I was going off script and looking at Allie's question in the chat and really thinking about that. Can I go off book and respond to it? I feel like it's related in terms of the kind of looking forward piece. So Allie was asking about long-term goals for food sovereignty and going beyond the emergency food provider space. And I think two key areas for that in Worcester are around thinking about land access and land ownership, and then also thinking about just direct resources for the purchase and sale of local food. And in the second one, I know I kind of harp on HIP in every single question. I don't think that's like the end game goal, but I think as a midterm goal for a more just food system, programs that directly provide resources with as little administrative burden, as little waste sort of in bureaucracy as possible, especially in the hunger and anti-poverty space, are the most effective and provide the most, dignity for folks who are using them. But also, more importantly, I think programs like the Healthy Incentives Program really pay for themselves. The investment going back into the local food economy. I heard some incredibly powerful testimony from local farmers talking about the growth in their business, allowing them to reinvest into their farms with local labor and spending those dollars here in Massachusetts to grow a stronger and more resilient food system. So I think that is a really powerful medium-term solution. But looking in the longer term, I do think a big key part of this is access and ownership of land. In Worcester, we just completed a study with Conservation Law Foundation looking at the state of urban agriculture and community gardening and assessing vulnerability. The Regional Environmental Council is an organization. We don't own any land, and we support 65 gardens, all of which have land use agreements, some of which are very informal. We've seen a lot of gardens and farms lose land or have their gardens be changed or reduced because of decisions by the property owner. But unlike New York and unlike Boston, we have a lot of opportunity of a lot of land available. There is a lot of potential for community-owned land for urban farming. There are a lot of different models that can be tapped into. And I think I would see that as one of the key areas to focus on for longer-term solutions.
Thanks, Grace. Cheryl, I'm going to come back to you with this question that was dropped in the chat that Grace just responded to, because I want to hear your response to it, but I'm going to come back on track for our third question about opportunities, and would love to hear from Charlotte. What sort of opportunities have presented themselves for you in your work?
Yeah, sure. I love everything that's been said so far, and I couldn't agree with it more. I think, revitalization of collaboration is a huge opportunity here. I can remember in the early days just feeling like there was an incredible vacuum in the leadership department. Like, who is in charge here? Who knows what's going on? Who's making sure that we're all working together to get the most amount of work done? And the answer was there wasn't really anybody. There's a great book by Alice Walker, which is called We Are the Ones That We've Been Waiting For, which is what comes to mind. And, that's what we've had to do, is we've had to work on building those relationships, and with as much need as we're seeing, we can't afford to be anything less than the most efficient we possibly can. So if you guys are doing that, that's great. You do it. We'll focus our energy someplace else. And we have to figure out where the gaps are. And that comes from us, just working together and being very transparent about our goals and what we're seeing and what we need, right? So, a big part of that for us in being the contractor for the Farmers to Families program is that we pretty quickly determined that a lot of the resources were going to the same areas. So a lot of resources were going directly into Boston, which is great. There was a ton of need there, but we weren't seeing any resources going to Lawrence and to Worcester. So those were two areas that we focused on really heavily. And that was just from anecdotally speaking with other organizations and figuring out the areas that they were servicing. So we definitely need to do more of that. And we're working with a few different groups, including Harvard and some other hunger relief organizations, to do some mapping, some GIS mapping, which is sort of overlaying the need with where different organizations are serving to figure out exactly where the gaps are. And that's another huge part of like trying to make this an equitable system, right? Like we can't be just leaving out huge chunks of territory because maybe they're a little bit more challenging to serve, or maybe we just don't even know. So that's been a really important piece for us. The same thing with the cross-sector communication, right? Like probably for the first time ever, we've had calls where we had multiple of the largest produce distributors in Boston on the call, you know, their competitors at the same time, along with the food bank, along with state legislature, like, and we have never had that type of opportunity before. So we need to, you know, use that to the best we possibly can to drive change. And as other folks have said, land access is a huge piece of that. Supporting our local food system is a huge piece of that. So a requirement for the sourcing of the Farmers to Families program was that all farms were GAP certified. In Massachusetts, farms don't get GAP certified. It's not a thing. It doesn't make sense for the scale that most of them are growing on. So we had to work with some folks at the state level that agreed to sort of like put their head on the line for us and tell us that we could move outside of that to some other food safety certifications that were just as good, right? And so we're lucky to have like the Harvard Food and Law Clinic that can advise us and, you know, say, you know what, like do it. And if it becomes a problem, we've got your back, right? And through that, we were able to drive more than $1 million of sales back to our local farmers that would have otherwise been outside of the region, right? So that's incredibly important. Like we don't know what the future holds, but we know that like we're going to need as many of our farmers to be successful as we can to be successful altogether. So, you know, right now we're really concentrating on growing our food hub, which provides them access to new markets, because that is the one thing, regardless of what changes, we know we know that we need those farmers to be successful. The other piece that we're working on is we're trying to acquire a farm ourselves, which is out in Acton, and that's like in the works right now. And we're going to be doing a super deep dive over the course of the next year to figure out how we can best leverage that resource to drive change. So, I mean, in our area, in the greater Boston area, land access is huge. There isn't that much land. So it's going to be a little bit different than what Grace is seeing. And that doesn't mean that we can't also learn from each other's, you know, struggles through this, but that is something that we definitely all need to focus on.
Thank you, Charlotte. Letha, what sort of opportunities have you seen, and how will you carry forward some of those opportunities into the future?
Yeah, I actually, you know, maybe in the interest of time, and because I agree with most of my fellow panelists, I actually don't think I can, you know, add too much more. Maybe the one line that I would say is that going beyond just an increased awareness of food security, I would say that people now have a bit of a better understanding and glimpse into food systems around the resources, work, people, animals it takes to get food from the field to the plate in front of them, and the great risks and vulnerabilities along that supply or value chain. So I think I'll leave it at that, because I really do agree with what most the other panelists have said so far.
Thank you. I appreciate your consciousness of the time. And also, I think to lift up what you just said, right? The folks who finally have this understanding, the people in power, right? Legislators and funders, you all spoke to the importance of funding to make some of this work happen. And so if those folks, if they're starting to see how all of this is interconnected, then maybe we're actually going to see some good change going into the future. Last but not least, to close us out on this question, Naomi, what sort of opportunities have you seen at the Food Project, and how you carry that work forward?
Yeah, At the beginning of the pandemic, everything was put on pause for the youth work. Youth couldn't go on the farms. We couldn't do the community work that we wanted to or were used to doing. We couldn't go visit the other crews up in North Shore. So while we were shifting our work to more stuff that would be better for Zoom and like as if it were in person, I think this brought a good opportunity for the staff at TFP to have a conversation with the youth on what the youth would like to see, what they would want to work in, what type of projects they want to see be created that they're passionate about. So I think 2020 brought an opportunity for a bigger space for more collaboration between the youth staff and the adult staff, and allow more leadership opportunities for the young folks at TFP, instead of the adult staff always facilitating all these workshops and curriculum to youth. So it has definitely created an opportunity for the young people to become more independent and voice their opinions about what they would like to see. And I think after hearing the opinions of what work wants to be done, this year we already started 2 new programs at the Food Project based on the feedback that we heard. So we already started an internship pilot at the Food Project. So this would be a program that has more specialized food system roles for the youth that are still in high school after they have gone through about 2 years of experience with Sea Crew, Dirt Crew, and Root Crew work. And then we created a fellowship pilot, which is what I'm involved in now, which is called Bloom Crew. So this is a crew full of alumni that are basically utilizing all the skills that they learned during their time throughout high school at the Food Project and applying those same set of skills and knowledge to more intersectional work across the greater Boston region and focus on certain areas of the food system that they would like to see change in. So I think all the opinions and collaboration between youth staff and adult staff has definitely created a promising new curriculum to come after this pandemic. Just yesterday, Root Crew hosted their own community forum over Zoom, where they invited residents of Dudley to talk about the food system. And there's other projects that are starting. For example, I'm in a group with other TFP members and a research fellow, and we're hopefully going to create a podcast that features local chefs in the Dudley neighborhood and talk about their experience about, owning a local business in the neighborhood and their involvement in the food system and what they would like to see come out of the neighborhood. So all of these big things are still in the works. So it's very exciting to see new stuff happen at TFP since I've been here for so long.
And it's certainly inspiring to see how many young people, right, are organizing and getting behind this and making food justice happen. So thank you for all of your work. It's really amazing. I do, as promised, we just have about 10 minutes left, but I did want to circle back to Cheryl with this question because I think you're going to have a really insightful response to it. So earlier in the chat, Ali asked, you've talked about long-term goals of food sovereignty and helping communities go beyond the need for emergency food providers. Can you give some specific examples of what success in this realm might look like?
Interesting. I am all about advocating for building community food models in communities, especially communities like mine that are othered, that are marginalized, and giving autonomy to the community members that live in that community to run those models. So what I would like to see more of is more TA work around training community members, around teaching them, giving them access to funding and resources to actually whether build community-run farmers markets, whether build out micro enterprises that are connected to commercial kitchens so they can develop their own value-added products, giving access to land space so that they can develop their own community gardens, community spaces. So it's all about shifting the resources to help to develop these models. And trusting and believing in the community, that they have the resources, that they have the ability and they have the expertise to be able to develop these models. And I not only work at New Roots Community Farm, but I also, work in my own community where we have a community garden where we try to do to realize a lot of these things. And being at different tables and on boards and actually advocating for this particular type of work. So I want to see real tangible, work being done on this, money being going to this, and a belief that people in their own communities know what they need and can direct how they're being built.
Awesome. I knew you'd have a great response to that question. Thank you so much. We had one more question come in that I think is directed to any of you. So I would invite maybe one or two of you to respond to this before we close out. So the question is, as a future healthcare provider, what are some ways providers can support organizations like yours and connect patients with all of the valuable resources that you provide, and just generally connect folks to food? So as a future healthcare provider, what would you say? Grace, go for it.
One thing that's been really effective for us is we partner with one of the community health centers to have the medical student interns work shifts at the mobile market. And I think we've tried a lot of different partnerships with healthcare around implementing hunger screenings and trainings, but we know that time in the doctor's office is so tight and we're not experts in healthcare, and it's so hard sometimes to build those relationships. But I think having that opportunity for folks who are doing their clinical rounds and their time in the field to reach out to a community partner and to offer some of that time to be on the ground working in the programs is going to make just an indelible impression on those folks who will become the providers in our community. So I would encourage that. I would love to see more of it.
Anybody else want to take that one on?
Sure. We have worked really closely with a lot of health providers in our community. We're so grateful for that. And I think, one of the things that was incredibly helpful in kind of catalyzing in some of our work was we met with some physicians at Lowell General Hospital who happened to have access to community benefit funds, right, to promote programs that were of benefit for their patients. And we talked to them about this idea of providing like a CSA along with education for patients who were going through some kind of recovery, whether it was from cardiac disease or cancer recovery patients. And through this community benefit funding, which this particular physician said, yeah, sign me up. I'm going to be your advocate and support this. We were able to pilot these two programs. And I actually just listened to one of our staff, Juliana Capucci, talk about her experience working with these patients and how, it was about the provision of the food, but being able to share that in community actually really helped people through like a very hard time in their lives, kind of transitioning from like, I am going through treatment for this disorder to like, okay, now I'm going to have to learn to live my life and eat in a new way. And doing that alone is really hard. I think any of us who have ever been on a diet know that like going on a diet by yourself is no fun. And it's really easy to fail when you don't have a support system. And so I think this was one of those situations where like us being able to provide really amazing local delicious food and also create this supportive community with education, it had a lot of impacts for the people that were involved. It was about food security, but it was about really having a support network to go, and really have more successful health outcomes. And so I think being able to make those connections with organizations like this, the growers in your community, the people who are doing the food education work, and figure out ways to make the connections for your patients possible, not necessarily giving like individual referrals to every single one, but figuring out how you can do that, make that connection in a systemic way. And that has been kind of the model that we've gone on to like create all these other programs that are going to support a much wider range of people. So I think just you're aware of it, right? As you go into your career as a health provider, like now you can start to create these connections with the other folks that you work with, and think about ways that you can really creatively infuse healthy food access into the work that you do with your patients.
Thanks, Jessica. I think, well, firstly, I want to thank you all for your work. I've learned so much through this discussion, and so appreciate all of the lenses and angles you're taking to get this work done, our collective work done. I think we're going to close out. I'm going to paraphrase a question that was dropped in the chat a little bit to close us out. And in just a couple seconds, because we are very limited on time, tell us what is one way that folks who are in attendance today can best support your organization and your work or your mission. What is, and I'll just go in alphabetical order. Charlotte, what's one way folks in attendance can best support your organization?
Yeah, so we do all of our gleaning, all of our harvesting in the field with volunteers. So that's a super fun and easy way to support us. And along the way, you'll learn a great deal about the food system and the factors at play and the reason in which those crops are not being harvested. So I would recommend it to anybody. You can just look it up on our website.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlotte. Grace, how can we support you?
I would echo volunteering, specifically in Worcester, helping with gardens at schools because our schools have been closed for a year and they need a lot of love. And I would also say supporting advocacy efforts around anti-hunger policy.
Thank you. Jessica, how can we support Mill City Grows?
So I'm going to do this in the bulleted way. I've seen work so successfully for like busy moms. If you have 5 minutes, you can donate. If you have an hour, you can write and call your legislators and tell them about everything you heard today. And if you've got more time than that, then come give us a call, volunteer, tell your friends, bring them too. We would love to have you. That's all I got.
Great. John, how can we support the food project?
I think I would recommend that folks just take a lot of the wisdom that a lot of folks have shared here out into like conversations, especially digging into the historical and systemic forms of oppression that have contributed to where we are in so many different places. And I think that could help a lot.
Great. Kelly, how can we support the food bank?
So if you want to visit our website, it's www.mvfb.org, and we have a whole list of ways you can support us. We welcome volunteers, food drives, financial donations. And then in the real short term, we're celebrating our 30th birthday this year, and we have a virtual birthday party next Thursday. Registration is free, and that's also on our website. We'd love to see you there.
Awesome. Happy birthday. Thank you. Latha, how can we support your work?
Yeah, since I'm a city government and none of those ways of engaging really applies to me, I'm actually going to take this time to answer the previous question because I actually went to medical school before entering this, like expanding. So just very quickly, if you're entering the healthcare field, you can actually implement the structural vulnerability assessment tool, which is a 43-item questionnaire that actually reviews 6 domains around structural vulnerabilities, like social determinants of health. And then just wanted to throw that out there. But then I think I'll leave people with 2 quotes and a few suggestions for books. So one quote, "Food charity has become so normalized, it's deeply embedded in our cultural and social values. But charity doesn't address the root causes of food insecurity, rather it perpetuates it." Second quote would be, "White supremacy is financed by capitalism, which created and enshrined charity as our default response to food insecurity." And then if you'd like to learn more about those 2 quotes, you could read these 3 books: Sweet Charity, Emergency Food and the End of Entitlement; Big Hunger, The Unholy Alliance Between Corporate America and Anti-Hunger Groups; and Feeding the Other, Whiteness, Privilege, and Neoliberal Stigma in Food Pantries.
Thank you for that resource sharing. Cheryl, how can we support your work?
First of all, Latha, you need to send us that in an email. And second, what John said is what I say: educate yourself, learn more about the food system, learn about how we can dismantle the oppressive food system that we have. You can donate to IRC, but they are large nonprofits. Yeah, but you can donate to other projects that I'm affiliated with, particularly Kelly Street Garden. You can donate to that. We have a website, www.kellystreetgarden.org. But number one, educate yourself. I think people need more education. And those three books.
Yeah, so people are asking for the titles of the books in the chat. If somebody can drop them in, that would be hugely helpful. And Naomi, close us out. What can we do to support the youth work in the food justice movement?
Yeah, you can donate to the food project at thefoodproject.org. If you live in Greater Boston, you can come volunteer at a greenhouse or a farm, or you can buy locally at our farmers markets in both North Shore and Greater Boston.
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much, all of you, for your participation, your wisdom, and your knowledge and your work. This has been really inspiring. I'm going to turn over to Jessica to close us out and give a shout out to our sponsors. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to thank everybody who attended for being here today and taking some time out of your busy day to educate yourself, which we've just heard is really important, and learn from this really diverse group of panelists. I want to especially thank all of the panelists for all of the work that they've done to be here. We had lots of prep sessions and talking points and figuring out how we could structure this conversation. They've all put a lot of time and effort into bringing this conversation to you. So I want to thank you all so much for being here and sharing your experiences and sharing your wisdom. And I definitely want to thank Jamie, our amazing moderator, for taking this on, as she just started on our board of directors and we threw this awesome activity her way, and you've done a wonderful job. Kisaya, our board member, for her introduction at the beginning from the side of the road, because she's just like that and she's an awesome rock star. And I also want to thank our amazing staff at Mill City Grows for all their support of this event, and for our development team, Catherine Davis, Suzanne Cromwell, Carrie Keeler. They have done an incredible amount of work putting this together. And I am going to send you all off with a beautiful screen share. I just want to thank our sponsors who have made this possible. This event, it really provides a lot of support from Mill City Grows and our work, and also all of the panelists here. Nancy Donahue, Plenus Group Incorporated, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, Microdesk, Jeanne d'Arc Credit Union, Align Credit Union, Eastern Bank, and Enterprise Bank are our annual event sponsors. And our community sponsors as well: Mahoney Oil, Wegmans, Lowell 5 Bank, Nobis Corporation, Golden Girl Granola, and the Mass Cultural Council through their festivals program. Thank you all so much for your support and for making today possible. We've really enjoyed spending this time with you, and thank you all. I hope that you're going to take what you learned today and go make some systems change, right? Have a wonderful evening, and we hope we'll see you here soon. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.